Okay, so let's get right into it. We're not just talking about another celebrity trial here. Nope. What's happening with Diddy's sentencing is actually a fascinating look into the complexities of the justice system itself, a place where black and white answers are incredibly rare. And that quote, it pretty much sums up this whole explainer. The most challenging situations, especially in a courtroom, live in those gray areas. They force us to hold two seemingly opposite ideas in our heads at the very same time. Oh, it applies perfectly. Because Diddy's sentencing hearing isn't just about one guy. It's become a battleground for two completely different ideas of what justice should even look like after a long, complicated trial. This whole sentencing phase is the perfect example of two conflicting truths being argued at once. You have what the jury decided, and then you have the story that both sides are desperately trying to get the judge to believe about that decision. So first, let's get the facts straight, because this part is crucial. The jury found Diddy not guilty of all the big, serious charges, racketeering, fraud, and force. What he was actually convicted of are two counts under a very old and very interesting law called the Mann Act. And that right there is the entire basis for this sentencing fight. And this brings us to the core conflict, this huge gap between what the defense wants for Diddy's sentence and what the prosecution is demanding. And you can see the two opposing philosophies right here. The defense is basically saying, hey, judge, look only at what's left. The jury cleared him of the big stuff. But the prosecution argues, whoa, not so fast. You can't just ignore the whole story. He orchestrated everything, and the sentence has to reflect that, even on these lesser charges. So what does the defense think that's worth? Just 14 months. Now think about this. He's already served about a year and gets credit for good time. So if the judge agrees to this, Diddy could be released as soon as next month. I mean, literally next month. But the prosecution, they're on a completely different planet. They are asking for 4 to 5 years in prison. The difference between those two numbers, getting out next month versus years from now, is just massive. And it all comes down to how you interpret those two Mann Act convictions. Now, here is where the defense's argument gets really interesting and kind of strange. They're trying to minimize his role by saying he didn't even have sex with the prostitutes he brought across state lines. Instead, they claim he hired them for other people and just watched. He was, in their own words, the voyeur, not the participant, which they argue should make him less guilty. To really understand their strategy, you have to look at the law itself, because the Mann Act, this very law Diddy was convicted under, has an incredibly complicated and pretty controversial history. So here's the textbook definition. It was passed way back in 1910, and it made it illegal to transport women across state lines for immoral purposes. On the surface, it seems pretty straightforward, right? But its history is anything but. You see, the law was passed in a time of intense racial tension and was widely seen as a tool to prevent relationships between black men and white women. Its most famous early use was to prosecute the black heavyweight champion Jack Johnson, just for traveling with his white girlfriend. This century-old history is now being directly pulled into Diddy's modern-day case. And they're not being subtle about it at all. Diddy's lead lawyer has explicitly argued that this entire case, from start to finish, was a takedown of a successful black man. They're using the law's racist past to argue for leniency today. So all of this, the verdict, the history, the opposing arguments, it all now lands on the desk of one person, the judge. And believe me, their decision is not going to be a simple calculation. It's a deeply human dilemma. So this is really the crucial question, isn't it? Does the judge punish Diddy based on the feeling that he got away with the more serious charges, kind of using the Mann Act convictions as a way to do it? Or does the judge have to stick strictly to the letter of the law and sentence him only for the two minor offenses that actually remain? The judge has to weigh all of it. They have to respect the jury's verdict, but they also know the full context. They'll consider the controversial history of the law, Diddy's behavior in prison, like his newfound sobriety, and yeah, that public perception of him getting away with it. You know, the law is supposed to be dispassionate, but it is always run by humans. And this brings us right back to where we started. The judge's task and our own attempt to understand this case requires finding some wisdom in these gray areas, accepting that different truths can and often do exist at the same time. Ultimately, this whole case leaves us with a much bigger question to think about.
In the pursuit of what feels just, how much should perception and context matter versus the cold, hard letter of the law? That's definitely something to chew on.